Hi,
Hey everyone,
everyone.
um, welcome. This is Kinda Chicana with Teresa Flores, who is one of the participating artists in the home exhibition at Acogedor. Um, so the original idea for this event was to do a Zumba Zoom as it relates to her piece in the show, but we realized it's pretty hot today, and that would be a performance that I don't think anybody would really want to be a part of. So Teresa had the great idea to shift it to think about other things that she's been doing in her home during the quarantine. And one thing is that she's been able to really address her or discovering her disconnectedness with her roots as a Chicana. And what we're going to look at today is how she didn't grow up speaking Spanish, but she's been working on her Spanish here, and she's living now in Los Angeles, where she grew up in Fresno. She's living just a few blocks from where her grandparents originally lived. So there's a lot of just rediscovery and discovery, and in learning about culture, and also having the time to do that. I think a lot of us find ourselves with more time since the pandemic. So she's invited a lot of people to join us today. And I am going to hand it over to Teresa to do the introductions.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. This is pretty special, and thank you, Nick, for being so flexible about like just shifting this. Like we're still staying within the topic of the show, but we're working within the concepts of my own work too. So I really appreciate that. So the piece that I have in Acogedor is a video of me dancing Zumba in my living room for 30 minutes. And some of you know I'm not like the greatest dancer. Um, and so, but I thought it was important for me to just kind of like share that moment because I know I'm not alone in it. I know that there's other people who also struggle with that. And especially when it comes to Zumba, it's Latin dance. And so sometimes they think that, there's this idea that you have to already know these dance moves. They must already be built into you. But in my case, like people learn them from their parents. But in my case, my mom never taught me these dance moves because she doesn't know them herself. And I'm not mad at her for them because I know why she never really learned them. So I got to thinking more just also like I've been learning Spanish. I started a year ago taking classes at ELAC, East Los Angeles College. And I'm a year into it now. Wait, a year and a half into it now? Yeah, and I've joined a group called Spanish Sin Pena, which is run by Wendy Ramirez, who's on the call with us today. And she's going to tell us about it in a little bit. But it's kind of this trauma-informed Spanish learning group, which has really helped me just process this idea of how we learn culture and how we create our identities, how we keep a memory, a cultural memory, and and just the land that I'm living in. So here I am at my home in East LA, this like Chicano Mecca. And I started thinking about my great grandparents lived 10 minutes away from where I'm living now. We have my cousin Daniel here on the call too. So he's a generation actually ahead of me. He's my first cousin's son. So yeah, like they were 10 minutes away. My grandparents bought a house in Huntington Park, which is like a 20-minute drive away. So I have a lot of connections to this area that I hadn't really thought about before or just acknowledged before. I was so just kind of like dumbstruck to even be living in Southern California for a while. But it's really cool because I have a lot of family here that I can reconnect with. So yeah, so I can trace my family's roots going up and down the West Coast for like 150 years. And we have documents. My cousin Carol documented us like in La Paz, in Baja, and traveling all the way up to Monterey, and just the generations of family in California. My brother lives in Seattle just to extend that like West Coast connection now. So this all kind of goes along with looking at the region, like our existence in the region and the cultural identity of the region. Like there's this line in the dirt now that says this is the United States and this is Mexico, but this is actually just like one big swath of land and culture that my family has been part of for, I don't know, maybe since the beginning of time, many generations. So I start to think about the colonialism there, the assimilation. We have the mission system that also ran from California, Alta California to Baja California, which undoubtedly my family, I'm sure, has some kind of ties to or and experiences with. And so there's layers of colonialism, there's layers of assimilation in these generations of my family being present in this land. And so as a result, because there's so many of us, so many families, I don't know how long you guys what generation you guys are with, but as a result, a lot of our families haven't taught the next generation Spanish. Either sometimes they point out shame, but also it's to protect you and keep you safe. My aunts have told me stories about being chased home from school by people telling them that they're Indians, you know, and so they had to like protect themselves somehow. They had to take care of themselves. These are family stories. These are things that have been going on for a long, long time, and they manifest now in these different ways, which is like us not speaking Spanish and getting shamed for them. So let's see. So yeah, so here I am, this kind of product of colonialism and assimilation, who's totally self-aware and starting to really examine it more closely, and wanting to talk about it with you guys. Because I know that if you're here, we've had some kind of talk about this. Like we've connected on it and we've kind of expressed wanting to learn about it more. So that's why I really appreciate you being here. Let's see. So yeah, so this is sort of a way of holding up a mirror, like a cultural mirror right here, just because we're together, we're gonna have this talk, but it's also being put onto Facebook, we're recording it. And we're just kind of reflecting back our experiences to people. We're reflecting back our language and the way that we've identified. Let's see, so we have on the call, I wanna introduce Wendy Ramirez, and we also have Mary Galindo too. And so Mary is an instructor with Spanish Sin Pena, and Wendy is the founder of it. And Wendy, can you go ahead and talk about it a little bit, please?
Sure. I think, well, I just want to say a couple of words to start off in terms of also the topic of home and where we're at. I'm also part of other circles of women. And so when we start sharing, we always share on whose land we're in. So here, and I live really close to Teresa, which is actually home for me. This is where I grew up, and in East LA, but here in the Los Angeles area, it was originally Tongva land. And so I want to acknowledge that and our ancestors and the people whose land we're on. And I guess that's a segue into Spanish, because Spanish is not, original to the Americas. It came from Spain, but it's part of what we have considered our culture. And like language and like culture, everything evolves. And so the Spanish that we speak, or the Spanish that's spoken at home, is not primarily just European or from Spain, but it's always a mix, and language is always evolving. But one of the things that I find is that shame that a lot of people felt being, not being able to communicate, and I felt it. And that's why I started Spanish Sin Pena. I felt it when I first left home to study abroad in Mexico City and not being able to communicate. And the Spanish that I had before was great for East LA, but not for a college class in Mexico City. And so definitely that was one of the seeds or the foundation of why I started Spanish Sin Pena. And then just also being away from home. I'm home now, but I lived in Washington, D.C. in the East Coast for 12 years. And so there is like that longing to be home, right? To be around the people, and what felt like home was Spanish. So for me, it was great. You know, I was able to get a lot of opportunities also for work with Spanish. And so it was something that I felt was important that I wanted to share with my community, specifically because I worked in a place where people had a voice, and if their message was not communicated in Spanish, my community couldn't understand. And so, you know, that's kind of a little bit of my experience. And yes, the home was the Chicano, but also the Mexican immigrant. And it was a blend of both of those is what, you know, growing up, that's what I was around with. Um, and so that's basically how Spanish Sin Pena was born. And now that we're in quarantine and everybody's home, everyone, everyone, we've grown a lot. We have a lot of interest and a lot of people that we're working with, because a lot of people, I think, are trying to not only learn the language, but also do that inner work of identity. Like, what does it mean, right? Like, how is the language part of their identity? And so it is a beautiful thing to be able to support so many people in this growth that they're doing, including you, Teresa. So thank you for the invitation.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your work. And Mary's another, she's an instructor with Spanish Sin Pena who I've been working with. And I especially appreciate Mary's approach. She's very deeply trauma informed and aware of that. And to be able to process that trauma at home, you know, I kind of feel a little bit safe. You know, I know that these kind of groups are good to have in person, but at the same time, there's just so many connections that I make every week and through the conversation that sometimes it's like, wow, I'm really glad I was at home to like have this realization and just kind of sit through it. Mary, can you talk to us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. And I just want to thank Wendy, because I started with Wendy, gosh, I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, wanting the same thing. For me, it was wanting to help my community. I'm a dietitian and have had my mom experience a lot of discrimination, but also just misinformation or being written off because she didn't speak English 100%, or people assume things about her because of her accent. But mostly they would give her information that wasn't culturally informed, and they would tell her how to eat to lower cholesterol, and it had nothing to do with what she was currently eating, so then she would ignore it. And when I saw Wendy, I had already taken classes, but I think the biggest barrier was the shame and the identity, and having people assume that I should XYZ. And so Wendy, when I spoke to her, there was times where we would look up words together. And I think seeing someone who was already creating a program and helping others, but also in their learning journey, it opened it was a wall, a very big wall, and it just shattered that wall of possibilities. I did not think that someone like me could be like that I could have errors, speaking correctly, grammatically, and that I could still help people. That those two things could live at the same time, and it was safe, because I was made fun of a lot on both sides for my English and my Spanish. And so I had a lot of trauma behind that. And I remember speaking to Wendy about that, and she just created that safe space. And so one of the goals that I had was to get a job counseling fully in Spanish. And so that was last year. I am here a year later, and I do now have that job, and it freaks me out every time, but I'm doing it. And what I wanted to bring to the discussion group that Teresa's in is all the stuff that I didn't hear anyone talking about. Just the thoughts in the moment, right before the call, I shouldn't really be doing this. What if I say things wrong? What if they look at me funny? Why me? Like, there's got to be other people who are more fluent than I am. But The same thing goes for when Wendy asked me to be a facilitator. I was like, Wendy, me? I'm like, what? And she's like, no, you can do this. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this. So I feel like I wanted to bring all the experiences that I had in my journey and still on about identity and acceptance and seeing the trauma for just trauma, and that my body is just trying to protect me when there's moments that I don't want to enter into a space and speak. Literally, I freeze, and I want to really normalize that amongst my group, because if anything, I think that's the biggest barrier. It's not conjugating, it's not learning vocabulary. It's in the moment when you have a trigger, we either fight, flight, or freeze. And how do we get through it so we can get to the other side and help the community that we want to help, even if it's imperfect? So, Teresa, thank you for creating spaces like this. I wish I had that when I was doing everything. And yeah, this is awesome. So thanks.
Thank you. I mean, I'm just really grateful to have the experience, and then to be able to kind of come out to my network and community and ask them to be part of this too. We talk about, one thing that I've noticed since coming from Fresno to LA is people say my name in Spanish now. And I think Jefferson Beavers was one of the first people as an adult that I heard somebody outside of my family calling my name in Spanish. And it really meant a lot to me, because like, I remember when I was a kid and I was going to start preschool, my mom had this talk with me. I remember I was like sitting in the shopping basket at Safeway, and we're like rolling through the grocery store, and she started telling me that I was going to start preschool and that they were going to call me Teresa, and I wasn't going to be called Teresa anymore. Not at school. They wouldn't call me that. They would call me that at home. But they had to practice with me and get me used to hearing my name in English. And from there forward, I was Teresa. But at home or with family, it was Teresa. And so I didn't hear it outside of my family for a very long time. And so Jefferson Beavers was one of the first people to start just like saying it again properly. And now in LA, there's kind of this, I come along and I meet people and they're not sure. They kind of, you can see like the hesitation. They're not sure how to pronounce my name or which one to say. And it just kind of started like processing with me, like, wait, there's like even a hesitation for people to say this. They're not sure if they're going to say it properly. And then there's just this like uncomfortableness for them to like figure out how to say it. So I got just thinking about our other names. Like some of you have names that can just be totally pronounced in English just fine. And then there's others of us who have kind of like anglicized our names or just say it in English. So I wanted to just open that up with those of you with your names. How do you pronounce them? What are different ways you've heard them pronounced? If anybody wants to just kind of jump in on that.
I guess I'll start on that one, just because I'm also from Fresno County. I grew up in the Southland, very rural town of 1,200 people. Originally Consuelo, my mom's Consuelo, but in my country town of Anglo, Portuguese, Latino, in kindergarten I was dubbed Connie. So for kindergarten to probably early college, Connie. And then within my family, Cello. And then somehow in my professional life, one of my mentors, she asked me, what does your family call you? I'm going to call you that. And then she introduced me to everyone in the arts as Cello. And I thank her for that every day, Pauline Kamyama. But yeah, I mean, it's gone through this iteration, and, you know, it's really kind of hard to hear your name being called, you know, in a very country form, or, you know, just, it hurts. It feels a little hard. But yeah, I now just go by Cello, and just, you know, appreciate the journey, knowing where it came from.
For me, it's interesting because my dad named me Mary, not Maria. So it was an intentional thing. And so right away, people are like, if they speak Spanish, Maria? Is Maria? Oh, it's Mary. And then there's like this whole conversation there. And then my last name, I grew up saying it Galindo. I grew up in Santa Barbara, and even saying Santa Barbara is a thing. And so when I started to speak Spanish and try to pronounce things as they're, I think, in Spanish, I said, well, what am I going to do about my last name? And I to this day still have, like, depending where I am, it's kind of like that code switching of, am I going to say Galindo or am I going to say Galindo? And even saying it in Spanish, even though I've been speaking Spanish, it still sounds weird. It's like this little kid in me is like, don't say that, because sometimes I'll say it and people are like, oh, excuse me, Galindo, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, so it's just, do I want to bring attention to myself? Do I want to be out of my comfort zone? It's the dialogue in my head still. And, but I'm proud to do that now. I just wish it was still easier. Like it doesn't roll off my tongue like when I see my mom say it. And so yeah.
Teresa, can you actually?
My name is.
Oh,
go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was wondering, Teresa, can you actually repeat the question again? Like my audio cut off like halfway when you were asking.
Let me see if I remember how I phrased it. Does anybody want? I think I was asking just like how do you prefer to have your name pronounced, or what's your experience with having people pronounce your name over time? Anybody else? Is that my question that I asked?
I'll go if I didn't interrupt the person who was trying to speak at the same time as me. So for me, historically, it's, my name is Cesar, but everyone, even living in Madera, which I originally came from, and then I moved to Fresno, all the educators, because there was predominantly, and the funny thing was there was a lot of white educators in a very predominantly Mexican town that Madera was. And every time my name was said Caesar. It's Caesar all day in and day out. And, as a little kid, my parents never referred to me as my name because I have a pet name at home. So, it's papas or potatoes. And that's what they call me. So that's how I recognize myself. I have my own pet name. So Cesar was like always something. I was like, okay, this is my name, but this is like more so like people who don't know me, like call me. However, I never had a huge connect. I always thought Caesar was it because this is what everyone who was in some position of power authority over me called me as. And so I believed it. But however, my parents from time to time, or my father would be like, no, your name's Cesar. That's my, it's my middle name, Cesar. So that's your name. I'm like, what do they say, Caesar? And when you're little, it's like, you don't really reconcile these realities and what this means in the grand scheme of things. And I think for me, as I got older, I was like, well, it would be nice if people called me, in English it's just Cesar. You just have a soft S. But people still, everywhere I go, and to this day, love to say Caesar. And I think I've gotten better over time, especially as I've tried to navigate kind of these new cultural fronts, like really exploring that. We're trying to reconnect to my, Mexican roots, to really reclaim that for myself. Like, no, my name is Cesar. Or if you want to say it in English, Cesar. But sometimes, I don't know, it's just for anyone else, it just gets exhausting. It's like, it's really an exhausting thing to continually advocate for yourself to be recognized as what you want. And sometimes, like, I just give up and say, you know what, call me the colonizer name, Caesar, whatever, because I just like don't have time day to day in like this very rat race society we live in. So I don't know. Sometimes I'm like on it. Other times I'm just like, I just don't, I'm exhausted, So that's where I'm at.
Elisa, please share.
So my name's Elisa, and my mom is a teacher, and instead of going through the baby names book, she and my dad went through her student list. and they really liked the name Elisa, and the student was Greek. And my mom got a lot of flack from her grandfather when she told him that my name was Elisa. As soon as she told him, he said, "No, it's Es Alicia." And she was like, "No, it's Elisa." He's like, "No, no, no, Es Alicia." And it's interesting that she's the one that actually got flack for my name. Elisa is a hard name in general for all cultures because there's a lot of variation, but it kind of reminds me of the Mary story, because people assume that because I'm Mexican American that my name must be like Alicia, but it's really Elisa, named after a Greek former sixth grader.
But then on top of that, you have the last name of Manjares, and you grew up in Clovis. That had to be a very unique experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've just gotten really good at explaining how to pronounce my name. So anytime I'm being introduced, I always give a phonetic. So I say MON-HA-DES. So people say Man Ha Des, and that's easier for people. So I've kind of made it easier, and people and then as soon as they pronounce it, they're like, "Oh, that's so unique and so beautiful." But my dad actually used to say Manjares most of his life, even though he grew up at Roseville High School. For those of you who are from Fresno, all Hispanics, and he said Manjares until he met my mom, who was a Spanish speaker, and she was like, "Why are you saying your name like that?" And he said, "That's just because that's what everyone calls me." And then when our whole family went to Mexico City, everyone was like, "No, it's Manjares." So we say Manjares. In Mexico, it's Manjares, and in Spain, it's Manjares. But we claim Manjares. So complicated.
It is. It's very complicated. Wow. Does anybody want to add to that, or I have
I'll add to that real quick.
Uh-huh.
Going back to my dad, Elisa's dad and my dad are the same person. So my dad, my name is Michael. My dad is Michael Anthony. And the story goes is my grandmother went to a movie when she was 14 years old, and the lover, the Brad Pitt of that movie, was Miguel Antonio. And she loved this person, this movie star, whoever it was. But she named my dad Michael Anthony. So it's just something interesting to note, is that she anglicized the name.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know my mom's last name got anglicized. I don't know how many people on here with your last names got anglicized. Jefferson's shaking his head. I see. Yeah, my mom's last name is Gaitan, and my grandpa would tell me the story about him being at school and the teacher telling him, "You cannot spell it Gaitan, it is Gaytan," so that everybody will know how to pronounce it. And then going forward, it was Gayton. And so growing up, like, it's just kind of, it shifted in there where my mom was Gayton, Gaytan. But I would hear it go back and forth. Like, I don't know how they decide when they want to pronounce it in English or Spanish, but I would just hear the whole family shift back and forth. Sometimes it's Gayton and sometimes it's Gaitan. Okay. Let's see. We have a question from Facebook about using or not using accents. Let's see. Can you guys? I kind of wanted to. Okay. Yeah. I also wanted to talk about the using or not using accents, because that goes in with our question that I wanted to ask you guys all, was about what are the things that you're doing to maintain your cultural identity and the cultural memory? you know, we're at home and there's a lot of things that we can do to maintain these things. Like I'm at home and I'm learning Spanish. I'm at home and I'm learning Latin dance moves. It's fun and it's new to me, and you know, it's stimulating. There's a lot of other things I'm doing. But like, what are you doing to that? Like, how do you decide when you want to say your name in Spanish or not Spanish? What are you doing to preserve this identity and memory?
Okay, so I'll speak to that because I actually have, I recently bought 2 cookbooks. One is a book about Mexican ice cream, and I just made some horchata ice cream like 2 weeks ago, and it was delicious. But I also bought a Oaxacan cookbook because I really want to learn how to make mole. And I've been like reading through it. There's like all these recipes, there's all these villages and all these cultural differences between all the places in Puebla and Oaxaca, and it's really interesting. But the other thing that I've really discovered in the last maybe couple of weeks is all these Mexican musicians from like the 1800s, like composers writing music. A lot of it is like they're rewriting like old folk tunes in the style of like a waltz or something. And so I've done a lot of research and a lot of downloading of music and trying to find sheet music even. And that's been a recent like quarantine type activity for me. It's kind of fun to like play the music in the background and then flip through my cookbook and make some ice cream.
I can go next. Okay, I think, you know, and that's one of the questions that I remember posing to the group or to the students, like what part of your culture do you want to maintain for the future generations? And I was just thinking this morning that I think it's whatever calls us, whatever we're good at, even since we're little kids. That's, you know, and that the cultures get blended, right? You get mixed. And so even, you know, like the food calls you, and you get those recipes, but then you add something that you learned here. For me, what always called me was clothing and fashion. And so I've been making, you know, when Corona hit, I just started making all these different things that I felt very connected with, in terms of like that they had traditional ways of doing. And then the other thing, I've also been shopping. I have this right. The other, you know, like being proud of my identity. Growing up in East LA around Mexican Americans, I sometimes didn't want to really say that my family was from El Salvador. So I have a friend that, you know, has clothing. So I've been doing online shopping as well, but also making my own stuff. And so that's the thing that always called me. And that's, you know, what I think that it's always going to be, that blend of creating new things from what we want to maintain from our culture. But also music is, I know that's for my husband. He's Colombian, and so he's just also been, you know, playing the guitar and listening to a lot of Colombian artists that are new from like Canada. So that's kind of what we've been doing in our household.
My cousin Daniel's on the call, and we have these talks sometimes just about how we're passing down culture, how it happens, and a lot of that just with my family, because we can trace back, like I said, I would be the 7th generation in California, and Daniel would be the 8th. And so we're like, what do we have? We have food. And a lot of the food that we make is very regional and specific to California. Like, it's old California recipes. So like our tamale recipe, I just found out, I saw like a post by Gustavo Arellano like a year or 2 ago, and he was calling our tamales, he called them norteño tamales. I didn't know they had a name. I mean, they're my great grandmother's tamale recipe. But yeah, Daniel, do you want to talk about our food a little bit or anything? Add?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I mean, tamales have been a tradition in our family for years, and we've tried to get together like every year to make them. And just recently, in the past few years, I think Teresa and a few other of our family members have kind of um, gotten that recipe or tried to reinvent, what the old original tamale recipe was. Um, but we just try to keep that in our tradition, because that's kind of been passed through like our family. Um, Other than that, I don't. There's not really any other food I would say.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, because I've talked with your mom about some of the recipes. I know that like in his branch of the family, like his grandpa altered the recipe. So there's ingredients that they put in their tamale recipe that we don't put in like my mom's line of them. But it's still like a way of maintaining the culture and passing it down, even though it gets a variation, based on the lines. Anybody else? I'm just curious, like, what are you guys doing stuff at home to like maintain this cultural memory or for your identity, or what are you doing?
I guess.
Oh,
go ahead. You can go ahead.
Cesar?
okay. All right. This is always happening to me. Every time I speak, I see. So I guess for me, I've like in the past, I've tried to also learn Spanish using Duolingo and whatnot, which is actually really helpful. But it is, again, very challenging, especially when it's by yourself, because it's like you can learn so much, but then after you there are certain triggers. It's like, am I really saying this right? Is it going to actually really translate to real life, how people are speaking Spanish, like on these streets? Like, is it actually what I need to communicate with? And then it's like a cycle of discouragement from there on out. So, which is why I've like intermediately have halted learning, but I need to get back to it. So probably after hearing this, in this group and discussion, I might start revisiting that. But one of the, I guess, the unique ways that I kind of incorporate kind of Mexicano culture in some way is through, and it's a very unique way, through religion, through Catholicism specifically. And grant you, I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I do consider myself culturally Catholic because it's what has been instilled in me since, birth. I think any Mexicano would say yeah, Catholicism is like one of the cornerstones of like any household, for like majority of us. And so I find myself using in this very sort of strange but unique way. So just to premise, like I'm a big nerd. I like to explore racial, queer, gender theory. I like to, explore, kind of historical underpinnings of colonialism, imperialism, and write down notes and then kind of share some of my thoughts online. And I usually kind of enter a space where I incorporate in a way like scripture and a means is how it connects to racial oppression, to queer oppression through different sorts of trauma and overall like lessons of forgiveness, compassion, empathy, and love. And I use kind of scripture like I know in my head to connect it to kind of the way that how theory that I learn and like how it can connect and relate to people, because there is a large kind of backing from still religious people within, our country. And so I think it's just in this really unique way. Maybe I'm just weird for saying it, but like my religion and kind of that underpinning for what I learned kind of has melded with my thought and like higher, I guess, sort of center of thinking and how I like really theoretically conceptualize the world around me and relate it to day-to-day life, and then also disseminating this information through this kind of melding of this religious scripture and theory, and putting it out there into the world through whatever kind of either me speaking on a live or me just like putting a random post on like my Facebook story. So it's just kind of this way that I found to kind of spread and like continue a culture in like my own sort of lane that I'm in.
And I see you doing that. I've seen you do that over the course of the years as I've known you. It's interesting because you weave it together. Kristen, we haven't heard from you. You're going to speak. Please tell me.
Oh yeah, well, I was going to say something completely different, and then Sasad reminded me of, I'm sort of doing the same thing, but in a way that I didn't even really know that that's what I was doing, and then he articulated it, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm kind of doing that too. But my grandmother, who recently passed away, I've been mourning her death. Just she passed in March, and you know, like before she died, I have always kind of dipped in and out of like her religion, which was Catholicism. And like, even when I had my period of like being away from the church and just being really skeptical, and you know, there's this righteous anger in the culture at the Catholic Church. And I'm not saying that that's not legitimate, but at the same time, especially in conversations about colonialism, like Catholicism is, you know, sort of seen as this, you know, this force that has been for evil. And yet when I look at how much comfort it gave to my grandmother, who in so many ways like endured trauma of her own childhood, of discrimination, of poverty, it's really been this force that's kind of transcended so many things in her life and helped her. And so I connect with it in this really weird way, almost like also sort of culturally, like it's a way for me to feel connected to her. Like I have her rosary and I sleep with it every night. I hold it in my hand every night. And like, you know, I'll now and then I'll pray the rosary, and, you know, just trying to connect with that. That is one way, even though it's not universal for every Mexican American or every Latino, but that religion has become part of it. And it's something that I do to connect with the culture, like, but it's also something I do to connect with my grandmother, who really was the last tie to kind of like the Mexican American experience in my family. Like she raised my mother to be very assimilated, and like she did that in reaction to how she grew up and the experience that she felt and the discrimination that she felt. And so my mother taught me the way that she taught me, which was to be assimilated and to not speak English and to not carry some of the traditions. And so my grandmother, I feel like, is that last key between worlds that I have. And I've been also exploring language. Like I'm doing an episode for work. I'm working on a podcast for NPR. Oh, I shouldn't say this because it's actually not public yet. So I'm working on a podcast, and we're doing an episode that has to do with like learning Spanish as an adult, or trying to reckon with not having Spanish and also trying to claim Latino identity. And so I've been speaking with a lot of different folks, including yourself, Teresa, and including Wendy, about what it is to learn Spanish as an adult, and not necessarily just just sort of like unpacking how we got here. Like, how did I get here as a 31-year-old person and not knowing Spanish? How did my mother grow up not knowing Spanish? What were the cultural forces behind that? And so that's part of the way I've been connecting with language and culture while I've been in this quarantine.
So, right before the lockdown happened, I started a podcast with two other Latinas, someone who both first generation, no, both not originally from here. So one woman from Spain and another woman from Puerto Rico, and I'm the like fourth generation California. They both are Spanish was their first language, and it's called Color Forward. And we interview multicultural women, so Black, Latina, Asian, and it's been really interesting calling myself a Latina, because in that world, when I'm immersed with all of them, yeah, of course, like I'm one of them, but I never really called myself a Latina, even to myself, until I started having those discussions, meeting other Latina, and even like I have another podcast with my brother, and sometimes using the hashtag Latino podcasters feels like really weird to me, because, and I don't know how he views himself, but we've never really called ourselves like Latinos. We're just like Americans. And I guess I never felt like I was Latina enough to embrace that identity until I started meeting more people and having discussions just like this, and realizing like being a Latina can mean so many different things. And I'm still in the process of like now I have like pride, but I'm still in the process of even like embracing calling myself Latina. And it's only because I'm in discussion with so many now. So, and that's something I'm always practicing every week.
Let me jump in here real quick and see if I can tie all this together. A lot to think about. Super grateful for a space like this, and also want to acknowledge what a huge privilege it is to be a part of a conversation like this where people are speaking openly about the duality of housing multiple identities in one body, and how that body is read by others, and then how that experience informs how we behave or perform that identity. And I really wish that when I was growing up, I had more access to spaces that allowed for nuance when it comes to talking about racial and ethnic identity. So my name is Carrie Lorraine Ayala. And for those of you who see the spelling of my name, is Carrie Lorraine. So in order to pronounce my full name, you basically have to be bilingual or know how to pronounce names in English and Spanish. And I am beige. I think I identified comfortably as white for the majority of my life, and I often referred to myself as fractions, which was a very common way to talk about racial and ethnic identity in the place that I grew up. I grew up here in Fresno. My dad is from Southern California. His dad was born in Mexico, and his mom was a white lady who was born in Michigan. And my mom was born in Mississippi and then grew up in the Modesto Ceres area. And what I didn't know until a couple of years ago, I'm 36 now, I didn't know until the last couple of years that my family has actually been in the Central Valley for over 100 years. That like my ancestors were here. I have a great grandfather who's buried like 2 miles from where I grew up, and I literally just found that out last Christmas. His name's Candelario Viveros. It's impossible for me to talk about who I am, why I am the color that I am, why I have the name that I have, without talking about this intensely violent history of colonialism on this continent, right? And so because most people are not well versed in that conversation, I only have that language because I went to college. I only learned that in college, and most of the people in the Central Valley are not college educated, and yet we are deeply impacted by and still very much are living the dynamics of the inequities and the oppression of colonialism. And so when we talk about something as simple as names, never in my life have I been in a classroom or answered the phone back in the days before you had caller ID, or had the teacher, specifically the teacher, and I really appreciated what was said about most educators being white, because that's another dynamic of colonialism, and the lack of access to professional spaces that then inform how we educate the next generation of people who are then incapable of having these conversations and being honest about our social dynamics and our political power and the way land and resources are managed. Like, we can't talk about, it's, how am I using this time? I'm using, so JSTOR is free from now until December. If you didn't know that yet, I have been fighting going to graduate school because it's expensive and I don't want to do it. And also what I've heard about exactly the kind of dynamics that we're talking about on this call in the institution of academia. And I don't know that that's a kind of fight that I want to engage in. You know, I don't know that that's something that's going to maximize my experience here on this earth and my understanding of who I am and what the purpose of my life is. And so, what was I talking about? There's like so many things that I heard people saying that I really wanted to address. And as far as the spiritual element goes, I myself work really hard at this point in my life to practice spirituality. And that's not something that I had access to when I was younger. My dad, who's brown, I am the first beige member of my family from my dad's descendants. My older sister is brown, and I am not. Oh, I remember what I was gonna say. So never in my life has there been a time in the Central Valley, in this place called Fresno, where someone sees my name and they see me and there is not a question. There is never in my life been a time where someone sees, oh, Carrie Lorraine, or, I went to a majority Latino high school and there were brown educators and brown kids, and they would see Ayala and they would look out and I would raise my hand and they're like, are you sure? Really? So never in my life has there been a time where the relationship between the name and the body that I have made sense to anyone. And that goes back to the education thing. But as far as spirituality goes, my dad left the Catholic Church that he was raised in when he was a teenager because of the spiritual violence that he experienced, right? So like the weaponization of spirituality, which allows us to access whatever greater purpose we may have, into a very narrow understanding of what it means to have a relationship with God or with ancestors or with meaning or with the universe or whatever you want to call it. When that's been weaponized, we really rob people of the opportunity to access their purpose. And so how that's impacted my particular life and experience is that I have in the past been had substance use issues. So I identify as a drug addict and an alcoholic. I spent the majority of my 20s drunk or high. And when I got sober, it was very difficult and very painful to try to think about what it meant to be an adult as me in this place. And it's only been through accessing spirituality, healing, kind of like we heard Sasak talking about, of like trying to access something that is infinite and divine about my existence. When my whole life I have been told that there's something wrong with me, that I am in the wrong body, that my name is wrong. I don't have the language to talk about global racial capitalism or the colonial state that I live in this occupied land. The Central Valley was one of the most abundant, dense indigenous habitats, environments on the continent. And today it's one of the most extracted, most imprisoned, most least educated, most harmed, violent, hostile places. I live right next to Fresno High School, and there's currently an issue of changing the mascot from being the warrior, which is a random Indian head, on this land, right? So there's a lot going on in my head right now and in my heart, and I feel super grateful to be a part of this conversation. So thank you for letting me share all of that with you.
I appreciate that, Carrie. Thank you. Thank you. Because I see you thinking deeply on our social media connections, and I just, you're always really spot on with it. We haven't heard from Jefferson or Jeff, and I'm wondering if either one of you might want to add something.
I'm getting all my Spanish from Narcos Mexico. There's that. I can't hear. I don't know if this is.
Wait, well, what did you say? You're Jeff?
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm driving.
Yeah, we can hear you. Keep going.
Okay, good. Spending time at home, like learning Spanish, is coming through Narcos Mexico, like for real. Narcos and Narcos Mexico subtitles is teaching me Spanish at home. Because obviously my name's Jeff, super hard to pronounce. My parents took that out of the equation. So, the most ethnic part about me besides my skin is if I pronounce my last name correctly. Silvis, for the most part, has always just been Silvis, but my dad, he would burn it in me. It's Silvas, it's Silvas. Don't let anyone call you Silvis. That's them Americanizing you. And I'm like, yo, you named me Jeffrey, though. People call you Bob instead of Robert or Roberto. I'm like, so, but I think, that's, in short, having the name Jeffrey or Jeff has kind of, I don't know, it's like prevented me from wanting to know Spanish when I was a teen, or like, you know, growing up in Clovis. Sorry, I'm supposed to meet someone. I need to try and get my attention. Growing up in Clovis, like, you know, we listened to country music, we listened to rock music. There wasn't really much emphasis on being Latin, being Chicano, being anything.
Jeff, be careful, please. You're making me nervous.
Don't worry. Trying to stay on topic and tell people to get away from my car. I'm actually just arrived in East LA from Santa Barbara.
Welcome to the mother.
I'm super stoked to be a part of this. I've been listening the whole time and like, oh yeah, I want to talk about that and I want to talk about that, but it's also I've been driving.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about. Like how I know Jeff is we met in kindergarten. We went to kindergarten together. We went to elementary school through 5th grade, and then we kind of lost touch. And then one day I was walking down the aisle in the Amtrak train, and Jeff sees me like 20 years later, and he's like, Teresa Flores? And I'm like, who is this? You know, but he recognized me from like the last time I saw him when I was 10 years old. And we reconnected, but we went to this Catholic elementary school that was run by nuns from Spain. But we, every now and then we would get like a Spanish lesson, but like they could have totally taught us Spanish. But that's just another example of colonialism in action. Like we were these Chicano kids who were also in school. We had a lot of like Native kids in school with us and Filipino kids, and like we just didn't learn Spanish from our Spanish nuns. Jefferson?
No, I was gonna say,
Jeff.
Sorry, go ahead.
Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was going to get to that point. It's like we were taught by nuns, and the ones that weren't nuns, like Miss Macedo, or like, you know, we had Spanish speaking teachers that totally could have taught us that, but they didn't. And you know, and I always kind of be like, well, I guess we don't need it if they're not going to teach it to us, because I don't know. And it was never touched upon either, though. Like they never said like, you know, you should be learning Spanish, or you should, or even in church, when we were in church, like I expected to hear some of it in Spanish, but not.
No, it's another extension of colonialism, and it was very much put on us, you know, through our education, institutional. Jefferson, but that's like such a huge conversation to have. But Jefferson, and you got anything to say?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me today, Teresa. I was really flattered that you said that I was the first person who called you Teresa in your adult life in Fresno. That kind of blew me away. I didn't realize that, actually. My dad is white. My mom is Mexican-American, thus Jefferson Beavers. I have my dad's white skin and surname. My middle name is Raymond, but it's an Americanized version of Ramon, which is my great uncle on my mom's side, on the Muro side. And then Jefferson is my great grandfather on my dad's side, on the white side. So yeah, Jefferson, like Jeff, not really any mistakes with that pronunciation. But when I worked summers with my brown cousins in the packing shed, you know, the folks we work with, the workers we work with, never called me jefe, because of course, you know, jefe is the boss. So they would call me Yef with a Y instead of Jeff. So Yef, some folks call me Yef from that time. But I think probably my really briefly, because I know we're towards the end of the time, probably my most hurtful name experience came as an undergrad in college at Fresno State. It was the early 90s. There were only a couple of Latino professors, instructors in the department I was in. And I wrote a poem. I now have an MFA, so it's just funny to tell this in hindsight. But I wrote a poem at the time when I was maybe like 19 or 20, and it was just about my experience pruning grapes in the winter. You know, when we were like 10 or 12, all the kids would cut the centers, and then the adults would come behind us and prune, and that's what you just did, you know, when you were on the farm. I grew up in Tulare County in Dinuba. And so I remember I wrote this poem called I Stand Here Pruning Grapevines. And my instructor, who was brown, I called him Mr. Brown in an essay. Mr. Brown says, wouldn't this essay, feel more authentic if you used your mother's maiden name, Garcia? And, I know your middle name is Raymond, so how about I stand here pruning grapevines by Ramon Garcia? That would make it sound better, right? And, I was like a 19 or 20-year-old kid. I didn't really have the language to express to them why, no, that was not right. But it stuck with me like for many, many years. And maybe 15 years later, when I first claimed the term Chicano, and I still identify as a Chicano, I really kind of started to peel the layers back of what he was really doing to me and what so many other people had been doing to me. A friend of mine, Anthony Cody, another biracial poet, it was an extraordinary book, Borderland Apocrypha by Anthony Cody. Anthony also has a white dad and a Mexican mom. And we're talking a lot about those kinds of naming situations. He says, hey, you should write a poem or write a book called The Autobiography of Ramon Garcia by Jefferson Beavers. Put that out. So I have bits and pieces of that. Maybe I should get back to that, inspired by all of y'all and all the things you're doing at the pandemic.
This is so special, you guys. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah, Jefferson, we have these talks a lot just because just the language, the name, and like how we identify and things like that. And I think when we have these talks, it makes things seem okay, and it makes things seem more common, and then we don't necessarily feel the shame as much. And I know we're all we're in our homes, we're separate from each other right now. We couldn't like physically be together, but it's special to be able to even have this experience inside of our homes with them. Nick or anybody wanna? I know we're kind of over time, so I don't want to keep you guys.
Thank you, Teresa, for bringing these people together. I love the conversation. It was really important to have, and that was kind of reiterated many, many times in the chat on Facebook. I want to thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing your stories and your feelings. I also want to say that as an adoptee whose biological father is Mexican and biological mother is white American, I feel you. And I'm thinking I'm going to get your contact information from Teresa, because I learned Spanish as an adult. And maybe we could have some type of interesting discussion about this, this rediscovery of identity, and then also this loss of identity from adoptees, in particular transracial and transcultural adoptees. You guys have really, there's a lot of points that I could jam with, so that's cool. So thank you so much. I don't know if anybody has any last final thoughts, and then we will say goodbye for the time being.
My final thought is I'm going to call you Teresa from now on.
I mean, that's how it started. It started out like that.
I just wanted to say this is probably the most people I've heard, maybe ever, who've had an American name, first name, and then a Latino last name, who I've heard speak my experience. I don't think I've ever had this many people tell me that they had the same thoughts go through their head. And so thank you. I mean, just that for me is so valuable and it validates my experience.
My final word. Oh,
you go ahead, Charlotte, please.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say my final words is just like, thank you, Teresa, for, this is really kind of home for me because you're bringing a lot of San Joaquin Valley to this stage right here. I'm from Layton, Fresno County, and I say it very Anglo because that's where I come from. It's country, but I'm Latina. I'm home in LA right now. I'm rooted in LA, but I feel a lot of kind of cross pollination in these, in this stage right here. And I thank you, Teresa, for bringing it together, for letting me be a part of it. And yes, my kids live here in East LA, but they're learning Mandarin. We have a Mandarin immersion program, and when in Rome, in a public school system, we learn Mandarin. So there's that.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
I just want to say really briefly, the first time I ever got to know Teresa Flores, I'm sure everyone here is here because you're big fans. She played a short film at the Tower Theater in Fresno as part of the Fresno Film Festival, 2006 or 7. And it was just a film of a flour tortilla on the gas stove burning as someone read a poem over the tortilla. It's called Tortilla Burning. And so my introduction to Teresa's exploration of, the intersections of her identity was literally a tortilla burning on a stove up on the big screen in a cinema. We're all big fans, Teresa. Keep up your great work.
Thank you, Jefferson. Wow.
Can I say one last thing too?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Teresa, for this. I think it's like, I've never had this sort of discussion before. And for me, it's interesting because of all these sort of identities in which I encompass, I have more easily been able to explore my sexual identity, my gender identity, my class identity, rather than my ethnic identity. Has been probably the hardest, like maybe for me, like the last frontier, maybe not the last frontier, but like the biggest frontier in myself left unexplored, because I think there is such a shame in, in this common experience that we have with being disconnected from our, from our roots and where we came from. And it's kind of really swept under the rug in so many like discussions, and like particularly now as it concerns when we're really at a pivotal time in kind of our modern history. I think it's like so important to reconnect to exactly what makes us, us, especially as we have so many examples of, other groups, other racial groups really discovering and knowing themselves and where they come from. Like why don't us, Chicanos also have that same sort of luxury and these spaces where we can discuss these things. And I think it's because we're, as I think Mexicanos and people from, Latin America have such, we're caught between this space of proximity to whiteness, but not also on the very latter half of the, racial hierarchy being indigenous or Black. And I think with some of us are like trying to negotiate, because we don't want to be just assimilatory and forget things, even though that might be the easiest part. Because there's so much shame still like left in us that we don't feel the right sort of like community to really express it with, because like everyone said throughout their stories, this duality of not being quite, accepted with, our families, and being ridiculed for not knowing certain things or not speaking Spanish or whatever, and also not being quite white because, you're still exoticized and you're still fetishized and you're still put and set aside as this other. And so it's like, well, where the hell do you go from there? So I really appreciate spaces like this, because it's like, I do find myself in a space, and I do want to claim this space for myself into further exploration, because I think it's, it's worth my time and is actually probably the best, most healing thing we can do for ourselves. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Cesar. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this. So I'm gonna let you go about your days. But thank you for
Thank you guys for being a part of this panel or discussion for Acogedor for the home exhibition. Thank you for all those of you who tuned in on Facebook. I love the interaction, and we will see, let's see, next Wednesday, the 9th, we have artists in conversation that are grouped in the time theme, and that'll be at 8 o'clock Pacific time. And right now we have Tobin Nichols, who is doing an Instagram takeover of acogedor.space. And next week, Ace Amarillo, I believe. So I really should have checked his name before I did it. He's in the Philippines, and he'll be doing another, an Instagram takeover. So we hope to see you at the other events. Thank you again, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.